Hello, everybody. This is the third episode of Ike's Political Minute, and today I will be talking about the Democratic dream scenario in the 2020 Senate elections. And in the previous video that I made, I discussed the Republican dream scenario in the Senate elections, and I basically outlined what a dream scenario is, as well as the dream scenario that the GOP would have, and they won a very large majority in that video and expect the Democrats to win a very large majority in this video too. So, without further ado, I'll start filling out these states from west to east. And in Alaska, I think that Mark Begich could win by a likely margin because if he did run again, which would be unlikely, he could win by a likely margin since in the earlier days of 2014, before it took a hard turn towards Dan Sullivan, he was leading by 10 to 11% in the polling data here. So if this is the Democratic dream scenario, and it is, then he could easily solidify his support here and win in Alaska. And Jeff Merkley is a very popular incumbent. He could easily keep his seat in Oregon. And Idaho, I'm not really seeing any strong Democratic candidate here. I think that that state would remain likely for the GOP, along with Nebraska. However, in Montana, I think that Montana would be likely Democrat if Steve Bullock chose to run, because Steve Bullock is an amazingly popular governor. He knows how to win in hostile territory, and he could easily make this a likely margin for the Democrats. And in Wyoming, Bill Freudenthal, you guys are going to think that I'm crazy for this, but I think that Freudenthal could edge this one out because he won the governor's race in Wyoming this year. I mean, not this year, in 2006, by 70%, where he won 70% of the vote here. And, to me it seems that although guys like Phil Bredesen have won every single county in a gubernatorial race before and still lost a Senate race later, this is the Democrats' dream scenario, and that's where things like that don't happen. That's where everything magically goes right, which is why I'm going to give the state to Bill Freudenthal. Colorado and New Mexico both will easily stay in the Democratic column. I don't see any way how they would not be safe in their dream scenario. However, Arizona, I think, would just be a lean Democrat, considering that Kirsten Sinema just won here by painting herself as a centrist Democrat, whereas Doug Ducey won by double digits here, and they're going to have to work hard in Arizona if they want to win here in future elections, which they most likely will. And in Texas, I think that Beto O'Rourke could win by a likely margin because he outperformed the polls big time. I mean, when the polls were predicting that Cruz would win by 8 to 10%, he only won by 2.6%, and that tells you something. I think that under the right conditions, he could easily make Texas likely for the Democrats if he won in places like Collin County, Denton County, and Tarrant County. And in Oregon, I think that Drew Edmondson could edge this race out, considering that he led in polling data for a little bit in 2018. And I understand that Kevin Stitt wasn't the most popular, but he wasn't the most unpopular either. And I think that under the right conditions, he could win here. Along with Kansas, I think that if Greg Orman or Laura Kelly became the main left-wing candidate in Kansas, they could win here, especially since Pat Roberts is retiring. And in South Dakota, I think that Billy Sutton could win this state by a lean margin, considering that he was an extremely strong candidate and he only lost by a little bit. And I think that he could actually win the state by a likely margin in the Democrats' dream scenario, considering that people like Tim Johnson and Tom Daschle were also able to win by those kinds of margins. And Minnesota and Michigan and Illinois all have very strong Democratic identities. I think that all three of these states would go to them heavily. And in Iowa, I think that Iowa would be safe for the Democrats, considering that Obama won it by a substantial margin in 2008, and in their dream scenario, a guy like Fred Hubble could do the same thing and flip this state blue by a safe margin. And in Arkansas, I think that Tom Cotton is a pretty powerful incumbent, and I really don't see any strong Democratic challenge in this state, which is why I would actually make the state safe Republican just because the only Democrats that won statewide here that I can think of right now were Democrats that were defeated or retired, and that is why I'm making the state safe Republican. And Louisiana, however, I think that under the right conditions, John Bel Edwards could edge the state out if he ran for Senate, and I think that also in Mississippi, I think that Mike Espy could edge the state out, considering that he didn't lose by the biggest margin against Cindy Hyde-Smith, and, you know, Hyde-Smith with her public hanging comments, I think that those words could really come back to haunt her in her dream scenario, and Alabama, I actually think, would go to the Democrats by a likely margin in their dream scenario, just because in their dream scenario, a lot of stubborn GOP members would once again nominate Roy Moore, which would be a fiasco for the Republican Party and make Doug Jones win by strong margins, solidifying a Democratic base in places like Tuscaloosa and Mobile and Huntsville. And in Georgia, I think that Stacey Abrams could easily win here in their dream scenario because she has already gained a lot of fame and popularity before during the 2018 gubernatorial race, and people are not too happy with Brian Kemp, or a lot of people aren't too happy with his allegations of voter suppression, and I think that he could easily lose here. That is David Perdue, not Brian Kemp. And Lindsey Graham, I think that he could win here by a lead margin because although the state has gotten closer, it was only by a likely margin in 2018. I also think that this state has a very strong Republican identity, and even the dream scenario can't do it quite yet, which is why I'm leaving this in the GOP column. And in North Carolina, however, I would make the state likely Democrat, and my reasoning behind this is that North Carolina went blue in the governor's race. It voted for Roy Cooper by a very narrow margin, but 2016 was not in any way a favorable year to the Democratic Party. I think that in their dream scenario, they could easily win the state by a likely margin if they nominated somebody like Roy Cooper or perhaps an even better candidate. And I forgot to fill in the vice presidency. I also think that in their dream scenario, that would easily go to the Democratic Party. And in Tennessee, I think that, like Bill Freudenthal, if he ran for Senate after being a governor, it would be tough. And considering that he was also defeated by Marsha Blackburn, but also he could learn from his mistakes, like not too walking too far away from his base. And I think that he really could win here. And Virginia, I think the Democrats could hold by a safe margin. It's taken a dramatic turn towards the left, and guys like Ed Gillespie would just get slaughtered because think about the way that Northam defeated him in 2017. And in Kentucky, I think that if Andy Bashar ran here instead of running for the governor's race, he could win. And this is considering that Allison Lundergan Grimes is actually doing worse in polling numbers than Bashar in the gubernatorial race. And I think that if Bashar did change his mind and run for the Senate, he could totally win Kentucky. And not by just a lean margin, but a likely margin. And the reason why I say that is because Mitch McConnell is the most unpopular senator in the United States Senate. He currently enjoys a 54% disapproval rating, and Bashar could easily get the job done and win here. However, Kelly Capito could keep West Virginia by a safe margin because West Virginia is kind of losing its tendency to vote Democrat in statewide elections. I mean, Manchin was expected to win by a pretty substantial margin, and then he only won by 2.6 points, which means that if he had voted against Kavanaugh, Morrissey probably would have defeated him by 10 or 8 points. And this is not a good sign for Democrats in West Virginia. I think that climate change really is killing them here, and that's why I would give it to Capito by a safe margin. And Delaware, New Jersey, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, all of these states very easily going to the Democrats, as well as New Hampshire. Jeanne Shaheen is not that unpopular, and also considering that Barack Obama carried every single county in New Hampshire in 2008 against John McCain, I think that Shaheen could very easily do the same in the Democrats' dream scenario, and In Maine, I think that Maine would only go Democrat by a lean margin, and my reasoning behind that is that the Democrats have lost a lot of faith in her. I think that she's tried to brand herself as a moderate, yet she consistently votes more conservative. But, however, she's still widely popular, and she won in the bluest of blue wave years, 2008. And for that reason, I think that she would be defeated in the dream scenario, but only by a lean margin. Thank you everybody for watching this video. Comment down suggestions below, and I will see you all later.